Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. So, The Elder Scrolls. It's a series that is considered to be the high mark of gaming, even royalty to some. And I have never played them. Maybe I played Skyrim once and really got bored of it and never bothered to play much after that. But if you're wondering why I'm playing this game, Oblivion, well, one, it was like $2 when it was on sale, so I decided why not. And secondly, well, it was just wanting to actually see why people really enjoy this game. Or at least enough to make so many hours of a retrospective on this game alone. So what is the Elder Scrolls series? Well, it was originally a series that had its beginning in the DOS era. Yeah, that era. Where basically it was hard enough to figure out what the heck you're supposed to be doing. Unless you had the manual, which even then, that could still be a nightmare in and of itself. And this is where Bethesda comes in. After releasing a lot of sports games and tie-in games, which was more of their wheelhouse at the time, they decided to work on Elder Scrolls, and it was actually a big hit at the time. Or at least, in that sense of, it did well, better than anyone expected it to. If you want to know more about this era and the beginning of the Elder Scrolls series, I recommend Jular, or this person on screen, video on the original game Arena and their video on Daggerfall, which was very useful and very nice to learn. It's a well-crafted video. In any case, they were beginning to expand the series with more and more games, and after Morrowind, the 7th generation was coming up in the horizon. And so they prepared their next big game as they hoped to wow a lot of people, as they became a big contender around this time. So when it came out, it became a huge success, basically being considered the big new standard where all RPGs would be compared to, for a good chunk of time. Well, until Skyrim happened, but that's another time. My whole point for this intro is to mostly kind of frame it in your mind about the way people viewed this game at the time, just to make you understand how much of a thing this game was. Well, again, until Skyrim, but we can cover that game some other day. And when you got that hype around you, well, that makes it interesting and made me really want to try it. So, let's see if it actually lives up to the hype of everyone else and see if it's even worth mentioning nowadays, or even back then. So, let us begin the review for Elder Scrolls 4. Oblivion. The game begins with Uriel Septim, as he is foretelling a danger unknown to him, and how he is about to die. Then we are in prison. Why? Never explained. It doesn't really matter, it's more of a trope at this point. It's mostly there so that you can begin your character creation. Which, to note, we will have to come back to this, because for some strange reason, certain things are important, but they aren't really told or explained. But we will get back into that later. After being mocked for being in prison, you are then greeted by the Emperor, who is here after some crazy stuff has just happened. So here's the quick rundown. Basically, Uriel just got barely away from an assassination. However, all of his sons are now dead, and there is no time to even worry about them as they need to get out of there now, through a passage through the prison that happens to be in your cell. He then notices you and says you're the one from his dream and that you're supposed to help him somehow. More in a bit. Anyway, he then tells you to survive as you all try to escape. After the tutorial, most of the king's blades, his guards, die, as soon he dies too, but not before he gives you the Amulet of Kings, and tells you to find Joffrey, who also knows the last remaining son's location. And after being given a few directions on where Joffrey is, you are told you are free to go wherever you want. Yeah, you can just, ignore the mission you were just given and go in the literal opposite direction of where you need to go. Which is very ironic because you literally start the game in the opposite direction. And somehow, ironically, this will cause issues, but we will need to talk about that later, since we need to talk about the gameplay, since this is going to take a while. So the gameplay starts by giving you an idea of how the mechanics work. Well, it's more like it should, but it doesn't. It's a little complicated. I'll try to explain as I go along, but just know, I want a word in your head to keep popping up every time I keep talking about the combat. Lack of impact. You see, the tutorial gives you certain ideas of how things work, but doesn't give you all the necessary tools to understand how they all function. For example, the introduction gives you customization, and we can get into other aspects of it, but for now, we need to talk about skills. Skills are basically determine how good you are at using a certain thing, like, for example, blades, archery, sneaking around. It all depends on what you're building for. However, the game doesn't really teach you, or at least give you good ideas on how certain skills are gonna work. For example, speechcraft. You see, in my infinite idiocy, I thought that speechcraft was going to be useful, since it would allow me to just talk my way out of problems sometimes. But nope, that's not what speechcraft does. All it does is raise or lower disposition, nothing more, thus making me wonder what's even the point of this mechanic other than to worry about shopping, which only matters to mercantile, which should have just been one stat, since at the end of the day, what the hell is mercantile if not just advanced speechcraft? You'll probably have noticed by now that I haven't actually explained the skill system. That's mostly intentional because right now we need to talk about a bunch of stuff and it kind of just landslides into each other, so let's get this out of the way. You see, the game has a weird system behind it. See, the skill system works by a system like FF2, where the more you use a skill, the better you'll get at it. Which somehow ends up better and yet also worse than FF2 in this way, because it uses it in a weird way. See, unlike Final Fantasy II, it still leaves in the leveling system, but ties it into the skill system too. You see, at the beginning of creation, you need to begin by choosing 7 skills. These skills become your major skills, while the other ones become minor skills. Every time you gain a point in one of your major skills, you'll gain some XP to level up. Because yes, there are levels in this game, which, once you level up, depending on what skills you've been using, including your minor skills, you can then put some points into certain stats. However, do note, only the skills that you were using will be able to affect the stat growth of your character. Now, you might be wondering, why is this important? Why does it even matter? And that's a good question. Let's actually explain it now. See, when I was talking about the leveling system and confusing, this is all confusing because certain other things are just left up in the air. Because you see, certain items actually have skill requirements. For example, certain weapons have requirements of either a really high or at least a decent stat in that skill weapon, or a certain skill level for a type of magic. It all depends on what you're trying to do, and in my opinion, the game doesn't do a good job of explaining this at times because sometimes it just doesn't really elaborate. For example, blade attacks deal more damage as you increase your skill. I think, I'm not entirely sure. The game doesn't really give me a way to actually, check this up, because there are no numbers in the game that tell you how much damage you're dealing. I mean, the game gives you these numbers, but that's it. That's literally all you get in terms of pure numbers of just knowing what the heck you're doing. Heck, the game won't even tell you when your skill is going to go up. You just have to kind of guess when it's going to go up. And yes, I know there's a bar right there to tell me, but that bar doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't give me enough numbers to know, hey, here's what I need to do and how many times I need to do this. And that just goes on in general. It doesn't tell me how much damage I'm dealing, how much damage I'm taking, how much magicka I'm recovering. Just nothing. Speaking of magicka, there's something called spell effectiveness. This stat, it's just something weird because the game doesn't really elaborate on this mechanic, and it's weird. So essentially, if you're wearing armor or using actual weapons instead of stays or just barehanded, the game will penalize you in the weirdest way. Because you see, it doesn't actually lower the ability of the spell you're casting, but the over time ability. Or maybe both? The game doesn't really elaborate, and anything I researched on it says that, but some say it only affects the overall damage of the ability and not the overall time. and some says it does, but not the damage. And it's just like, why? And really, this stat only matters if you're using illusion, because the game's bugged, which we'll need to talk about more later, and only allows you, if your thing is not at 100%, to only be able to use the skill at an ideal level of level 23. That is it. And I mean of skill points, not level. Though it doesn't really matter all that much, since at the end of the day, most of the magic in the game is kind of worthless, and I just don't understand why most of it exists, other than for interesting ideas. And that's mostly because the game doesn't really need you to use any of these other skills to really matter. Like, what's the point of fortifying or decreasing a skill? Nothing. It doesn't really affect your enemies all that much, and really by the end of it all, damage is the only one that matters, and by the end, there comes a problem which we will need to talk about in a moment, but later. My point is, damage matters the most, and thus magical abilities only work if they're useful for damage, or carrying stuff, because at the end of the game, I was really needing to carry a lot of stuff. And let me tell you, I had to sell a lot of that stuff too, which, that means we need to circle back to the beginning of where I was talking about, well, skills. See, the issue is, mechanically speaking, individually, they all sound fine, but when you actually have to deal with these mechanics outside and having to actually deal with these mechanics in their full force, it becomes an annoyance. Like Mercantile. As much as I was selling, it wasn't actually going up all that much. In fact, it has a weird thing about it. Let's just say, for example, you want to sell some arrows. For whatever reason, they designed it in such a way to make it that selling one arrow will give you vastly more XP than selling a bunch of arrows. Yes. Seriously, I'm not sure what was wrong with them, but they decided that was a good idea. Or heck, the whole combat in a nutshell, because we need to actually talk about it. Because yes, this entire time, we were talking about all these other things that we haven't actually talked about the core mechanics and how they work outside of it. Because really, talking about the mechanics around it rather than the mechanics itself really does help paint a picture of what the problem is. For example, being proficient at blades doesn't make it actually feel all that good. It feels very flawed. In fact, combat lacks a feel of impact in general. See what I was doing there? Every hit just feels like you're just slapping someone instead of bringing steel to their bones. It just doesn't feel fun or interesting. And to note, I want to reference that I really started the game in the arena. By that I mean I really started trying to learn the gameplay through the arena, because it at least forced me to engage with all the combat. But all it revealed to me was that the combat was flawed. Basically, combat just does not feel interesting in general. It's basically two enemies just kind of rubbing against each other, hoping they'll deal enough damage to kill each other. That's it. And it's really not interesting because all it feels is boring and dull. Plus, it's a little riskier because of how I cannot tell if I'm hitting my opponent or not, or even doing enough damage, because that's an issue too. We'll need to talk in a moment. And after a while, physical melee wasn't doing anything for me, so I decided after a bit to just go full magic. Which was a bit of a problem because I didn't really stat myself in such a way where magic would be useful. Magic's problem is that it's just basically a flat experience in general. Basically, you're just casting spell after spell. Nothing really feeling interesting or even engaging with that mechanic in general. I mean, the most interesting aspect about it is aiming certain spells because of how they work. And I mean, like, it is actually kind of cool when you can aim your shot just right when an enemy's kind of running forward to it. It's really fun. That part is actually fun. But otherwise, it's a flat experience. And mind you, you need to cast a lot of spells in order to gain more and more spells. Because after a while, again, the experience becomes flat because your damage will not scale. Well, unless you make your own spell, which that has its own set of issues, which we will talk about when we talk about the Mage Guild. But what my point is that magic becomes this flat experience too, and you just wonder what was even the point. Weirdly enough, I haven't actually talked about the one mechanic in the game that really exemplifies all the problems with the game. That being the level system. Now wait a moment. You talked about it earlier. Yes, I did, but I didn't talk about the other aspect of it. That being scaling. As you all know, the game is an open world game, but it's also an RPG. So the game doesn't really have a good idea of where you are strength-wise. And I mean, the level also scales gear, enemies, health, and other minor things, but otherwise, it's a very curve until a certain level, which is very ironic because, you see, the thing is, after level 26, the game kind of just has nothing else to do other than increase health, which just makes combat more annoying. So basically, if you keep leveling up, you're basically punishing yourself for no good reason. I actually do want to mention this because it is funny. Ironically, when I was learning about this, I was at the exact level where most people say, yeah, you better stop at level 26. And by the end, you're just wondering what else is there to do. Basically, it accidentally does something worse. It basically kills the need and want to explore. Essentially, enemies drop off good gear, so basically you never have to go out searching for any good gear, unless you're doing the DLC, but it hurts exploration and just makes exploration something you do for gold. Nothing more, not to find any unique items or just anything worth of value. You're just doing it for the gold, not for the fun of exploring this world. And it causes a knockback loop where basically, it basically starts hurting everything more and more the more you play. And you just wonder what was even the point of everything. And that's kind of sad, as exploring was fun at first. Because, you know, you're new to the game and you're trying to see how everything works. And by the end of it all, the next time you see a dungeon near the side, you're only going near it so you can fast travel. Not because you actually want to go in it. Which is not helped when a lot of the dungeons look the same from one to another. Actually, let's talk about the aesthetics of this game, and honestly, I don't know why they thought this looked good at the time. I mean, like, at some point it was, but at this point, it just looks... ugh. Plus, have you seen the monstrosity some people can make with this system? It's not good. I would argue that it looks fine, but the models themselves look weird. Like, they're from different games for some reason. I know that sounds odd, but that's just how it feels to me. But my point is, when the game just has this aesthetic to it that's just not pleasing, it just makes exploring the whole thing really uninteresting. Plus, I cannot stress this enough, the game really reuses a lot of assets at times. Like, all caves look the same. All dungeons look the same. All ruins look the same. Everything looks the same. Like, if you've been in one building, you've been in all of that particular building. Which, mind you, wouldn't be so much of an issue if it was not this long, but it's a very long RPG. Well, depending on what you're doing, but since I wanted to explore the game just to make sure that I wasn't being unfair to the game, I had to see a lot of it. And it's not very interesting. And it always feeds back onto itself, basically creating this problem where exploring became more and more of this thing where I'm not going to see anything different, so why should I go into this random cave than any other random cave? Unless I'm doing a quest, which even then, I'm like, maybe. And that's a hard maybe, and I'm likely never going to do it. Because really, am I going to go into this random dungeon just to get this one item and deal with all these enemies who take a lot of damage just to get some money back? Though ironically, that didn't stop me from looting everyone all the time. This was actually mostly because of the fast travel system, which you actually have access to really immediately. Like, you can actually fast travel to where Joffrey is just because. Plus, there's no risk or hassle with it, just meaning that it's something you could do all the time, meaning that I just used it whenever I could, just to go back to town, sell all my stuff, go back in, get more loot, go out, and repeat until I'm done. And after a while, this got boring, to the point where I just stopped looting in general, meaning that even now, more stuff in the game became worthless to do. And I hope you notice that all the problems really start compounding upon each other really hard. Because combat was getting boring, it made me want to do it less. And because of that, it just made everything else just worse by example. It made looting worse because I didn't need it. It made dungeon exploring worthless because why should I go in dungeons when there's nothing in there? Why should I do anything in the game when there's nothing out of it that's interesting or engaging? And really, at this point, I was only staying for the story because might as well try to see if that was worth it. And let me tell ya, it's really not. And that's the gameplay, really. I mean, like, I'm going to talk about it more in the end because of just other stuff we'll need to talk about, but otherwise, not worth it. So now, let us begin talking about the narrative, or at least some of the narrative structure of this game. Though normally I would just begin talking about the main quest, I decided to handle that at the very end because it's poignant to talk about it at the end, okay? So let's begin talking about the guild. The first one I did was the arena, and really all it is, it's just fighting up to be the champion. And really, the only interesting thing about it is that the Pale Prince is actually half vampire. How the hell does that even work? In any case, after reaching up to him, he basically asks you to kill him and that's that. Ironically, this led me into the Dark Brotherhood, which is very weird. I'm not sure how the game thought this was me doing a bad thing or me killing someone. It's really confusing. I was having issues with some Argonians, but that was a whole other issue. We'll talk about them near the end because of some other stuff, but we'll talk about it then. But let's actually begin talking about some actual proper guild, like the Mage Guild. The Mage Guild I did was mostly because I was a mage, so better off knowing where all the Mages Guild was so I can use magic. So what is up with the Mages Guild? Well, the Mages Guild is just handling a lot of problems. They're undermanned, understaffed, and, well, they don't have a lot of people that are smart enough to actually lead it. This is due in part due to the banning of necromancy. Yeah, necromancy. Apparently, there were a lot of people who really were hung up about having to stop doing necromancy. And this is odd because I had to look this up. Apparently, other magical schools and classes were just banned outright, like teleportation and levitation, which is very confusing in my mind. I can understand levitation because you don't want people to be where they shouldn't be, but I also don't get teleportation because it's teleportation in a world where transportation isn't really that fast. But yeah, a lot of people were hung up about it, like they wanted to practice necromancy and like this was the final straw for some reason. And I don't get it, like wouldn't that be like the first thing you would ban? Because, you know, by its very nature, it's evil magic. There are very little uses of it. So this magic being the thing they're rallying around is just like, what? Plus also the return of Mana Marco is coming back, so there's that. And I was like, who? Yeah, this is actually a narrative problem throughout the entire game, and I'll get more into it when we talk about the main MSQ. My problem is that the game sometimes forgets to explain things in any meaningful sense. I mean, the whole side quest doesn't even bother to explain who the hell Mana Marco even is, other than he's some powerful necromancer, and even then, that's not really much of an explanation. I mean, like, if you know Daggerfall, you'll know he's from there, and some of the weird stuff behind it, which is better explained because, simple version here, Mana Marco is actually a god who's also immortal. It's weird, and it's best to explain it as magic. It's literally the only explanation. Though it's a bit undercut about how we defeat him, as basically the Archmage, or the leader of the group, basically sacrifices himself in order to give us a stone that will somehow protect us from his influence for some reason. I'm sorry, it just doesn't really elaborate, and really, I couldn't care less. I mean, by the end of it all, once you gain access to the inner more sanctum of the Mage Guild, you're able to do a lot more stuff with it that's actually more useful than the game actually lets on. For example, enchanting. Enchanting basically gives an item a particular ability. For the most part, I just gain myself more magicka so I can just cast spells more often. Even if it's not a lot, it's still something. Plus also access to a staff that basically allows you to cast some level of spell for about any amount of time. Which has its uses and is useful when it's, again, an overtime damage dealer. Heck, you can actually make your own spells, which I'm a bit mixed on. Like, making a spell is interesting, but the process of doing so is not, because basically all you're doing is changing how a certain spell works, basically making it a lot more powerful but shorter in length, so on and so forth. While interesting is not enough to make it worthwhile, and sometimes you'll just not even get a spell worthwhile. Then there was the Fighters Guild. Basically, they're having issues with competition. Basically, they're getting undercutted by the Blackwood Company, doing jobs for cheaper and faster. Though this is mostly due to them using HISAP, which I don't know what that is, and I really don't care. I think you murder a bunch of people, though I didn't, but, you know. It's just bringing them to justice is all, and just doing some side jobs. That's it. There's nothing really worthwhile about doing this side quest unless you want money every month. Yeah, because there's an in-game calendar, and let me just tell you, there is never a point in the entire game where the particular day you are on matters. I'm not particularly sure why I did it in this order, but for whatever reason, I decided to do the DLC for some reason. Yeah. While I did the Knights of the Nine, I didn't do the Shivering Isles, mostly because of something that I'll bring up in a moment. The Knights of the Nine basically ask you to just bring back the armor of someone called Paleonol. I'm not sure why he's so important, and the game doesn't really give us a real good case of why, other than he fought this one guy, and you have to fight him again after making a new Knights of the Nine. Essentially, that's the quest line. It's a lot longer and a little more intricate, but otherwise, it's fine. Next, I did the Thieves Guild. Really, do not ask me, I just did them whenever I did. Essentially, this quest line basically asks you to just, you know, steal stuff. And after a while, you'll meet the Grey Fox, who's actually the leader of the Thieves Guild, and he requires a bunch of stuff from you. Why does he need them? Well, I wish I could tell you. Because, let's be clear about this. I didn't finish the Thieves Guild. Why, you ask? Because the Thieves Guild is one of the most bugged quest lines in the entire game. I cannot stress to you how many times I had to reset just to make it work. And when I reached one point, the game basically said, no, we're not going to continue this quest line. After so much waiting, I legit don't know what the hell happened. I even had the unofficial Oblivion patch, which, to note, I don't usually ever touch unless it is required, which this was. Well, technically, in that sense of, I wanted to talk about everything, but after that, I basically said, shove off game, I'm not doing that. And for the most part, it's mostly also because of just how bugged up the system is with also the crime system. Let me elaborate. This is a system basically where if someone sees you commit a crime like murder, stealing, a guard will come up to you and say, hey, stop that, come with me, pay a fine, or go to jail. I don't care which. Now, you think that's an elegant system, and it kind of is when it's working, but here's the problem. The game is a little oversensitive. Basically, if it thinks you're committing a crime, it's just gonna know automatically, not giving you enough time to just like, can you give me like 5 minutes? And randomly on a few occasions, I got caught up in something and basically it said I did something when I know for a fact I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was the weirdest, what the hell was going on? It was so weird. And really, the bugs were not helping. Yeah, we get to talk about the bugs now. I didn't suffer many bugs, luckily, but I didn't think I suffered enough. Like, I remember this one time when I was in this one cave here during the Mages Guild, where the vampires were all just, like, standing around. I'm not sure what the deal with that was. It was very weird. Oh, speaking of vampires, I didn't actually mention this. During one of my explorations, I gained vampirism. I'm not sure why I did or how. I think I got hit by one vampire and it basically infected me. But apparently that was enough, and I became a full-blown vampire. Well, I cured it very quickly, but still. Because yes, there's another system we haven't talked about. That being the disease. Yeah, you can get sick through various things, like poison and other weird diseases that I can't remember off the top of my head. Now, you might be wondering why I'm mentioning it here. Well, vampirism is a disease, but also because it can cause permanent stat problem. Yes, certain diseases can permanently damage a stat, and one time I was trying to return a stat back to normal, but it never did. I still to this day don't know what caused it, and why it's like that. It was the weirdest thing. And in any case, after that bug of the Thieves Guild, I just said no. I'm just gonna do the main quest and get it over with. Because I was just done. Because I was so bored at that point, I just couldn't bother. I had not the strength to even do the Dark Brotherhood, even though everyone keeps telling me it's the best side quest. You should do it. I'll tell you something. I watched all the cutscenes. It's not that interesting. Basically, it's all about killing people in certain ways to get bonuses, and after a while you find out someone in the Brotherhood is actually a traitor, and you need to find them. Which you of course do, and become the leader of the Dark Brotherhood of that section. Like, even referencing it now, it's just pointless because I really couldn't care. I just couldn't. And that's a real problem for me in general with this game, well, side stuff. I don't really care about it. Like, the only real stuff I really cared about were certain side quests, like the Painter's World quest, where basically you get trapped in a painter's world, and it looks all different, but even though it's a bit basic, it's different. Or the one with the orc lady that wants to become a knight. That was interesting. I could name a few others off the top of my head, but why? It's all the same to me, really. They don't feel all that different, but they're different enough? I'm just having an issue of just connecting to it is all. Honestly, all the side stuff in this game kinda just bores the hell out of me because as much as it would like me to be invested, it just doesn't do enough to make me invested. It leaves me without context, it leaves me with nothing really of value to care about, and I just do them because I can, not because I feel like I should. And with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the main narrative, or at least the MSQ. So let's actually begin talking about it, since, only thing left to talk about that's really meaningful. So after finding Joffrey and giving him the amulet, he actually explains a few things going on so that you're able to understand why this is so important. So let's start by asking some simple question. Why does the Mythic Dawn, these guys, want to kill the Emperor and all of his bloodline? Well, basically because the Mythic Dawn are basically worshippers of the Daedric Prince, Mehrunes Dagon, who wants to invade Tamriel, but can't due to the Septum Line and the Dragonfire. The Dragonfire is basically creating a barrier over Tamriel that prevents the Daedric Princes from ever invading Tamriel itself. Thus, in order to make sure that nothing can stop them, they just killed all the Septums just to make sure nobody can do it again. However, they forgot to actually look for the last heir because, well, the Septum line always has a few bastard children. That being Sean Bean. What? No, that's Sean Bean. Anyway, he was hidden away so that in case of something happening, he would be protected and, if necessary, take the throne if it ever needed to. However, either by a stroke of luck or maybe they knew ahead of time, they open up a gate of Oblivion to Kavach, where Sean Bean is. Yeah, and this is where we need to talk about Oblivion Gate. Oblivion gates are basically entering the world of Oblivion, the home realm of Mehrunes Dagon, which, after appearing in Kvatch, will begin appearing everywhere else over Cyrodiil, the place the game takes place. And I'm gonna just tell you straight up, don't bother with these. These are worthless. Do not do them. They are a waste of time and energy. Because you see, like I said earlier, these are very boring and don't really do much. The only reason why you'll ever appear in them is to get either sigil stones or main plot. And let me tell you, the sigil stones are most likely the reason you're going in there. Sigil stones are items that basically allow you to enchant an item with a powerful ability. Basically, I made mine usually always like the one that enchants your magicka, basically allowing you to, again, cast more spells because why not? There are other abilities in there, but I never bothered with them. That's actually due to because of the weird nature of the Oblivion gate. See, all Oblivion gates are random. Well, not entirely, like, the one you'll get in particular is random, but not the layout in and of itself. So if you don't like the layout of one Oblivion gate, you can just reset if you so desire. Which I did on a few occasions because, well, some of these are just annoying and I just did not like them. A few times, I actually got lost and had no idea how the hell I was supposed to progress. And after a while, why would I go back? I have no need to go back in order to do any of these. It's not helped that they also have a bunch of strong enemies in there that just make it even more time consuming. However, ironically, you can actually just skip all that and just run to the sigil stone. Which is mostly because, well, the sigil stones are also what keeps the gates open. So once you grab them, bam, the gate's destroyed. You don't need to worry about it ever again. So it became my natural state to just speed run them just in order to get them done. Which I don't need to tell you, kind of feels like a problem when that is the main way most people even deal with these. But with that said, let's actually continue on with the plot. After rescuing Sean Bean, we try to return him to Joffrey, who's actually being attacked by the Mythic Dawn. While you save Joffrey, the Amulet of Kings is gone. This would begin the investigation and trying to learn about who the Mythic Dawn are, and we learn they are led by Mankar Cameron. In order to learn more about him, we basically try to secretly join his cult, in order to learn more about it and try to figure out how to beat him. There's actually kind of a neat puzzle in the game, but the game will solve it for you for some reason. I'm not sure why the game won't just let you figure out the puzzle itself, but whatever. Also, I kind of want to mention something I did, and I want to see if anyone else did this. Okay, during the time when you're actually inside the cult headquarters, they'll basically take your stuff, and well, I didn't want that, so I tried to steal all my stuff back. It kinda bugged, and I kinda wondered, did anyone else try this? I just want to know for the sake of knowing. It would have been interesting. I know like you're supposed to try to do something to save this guy, but I don't know, I never did. He kinda just ran off. I don't know where he goes now. In any case, after raiding the headquarters, you basically find a book that basically tells you he's actually in the book, which is just like some weird cluster magic crap that I don't really get. So Sean Bean asks you to find some items in order to gain access to the world, which you do. However, this made me realize something really quickly, and something I really needed to mention. Okay, throughout most of this plot synopsis, I really haven't left anything out, like at all. That's mostly because the plot is as simple as it gets. With this straightforwardness, it doesn't have to waste its time too much, which it still feels like it does, but it at least feels like it's moving at least a lot faster. However, it also lacks anything worthwhile. Like, I really don't care about the characters, like, at all. Most of the characters feel two-dimensional at best. Sometimes they just feel one-dimensional. That's mostly because you don't really spend a lot of time with the other characters and don't really engage with them. I honestly felt throughout the entire story I was just going through the motions without really getting into the reasons of why everything is happening or why it should matter. Like, for example, remember that stuff I said about the Dragonfire and all that other stuff about why it's important? Well, I didn't really get into the real nitty-gritty about why it's important. Like, yeah, you know why it's important, but not the context. Which I feel is a problem because without it, it feels meaningless. Like, do you even care about Mehru's Dagon when he is not even elaborated on all that much throughout the entire plot? Like, yeah, he's a Daedric prince. What the hell's a Daedric prince? The game doesn't really stop for a moment to actually elaborate on these things. I understood these things because I actually went out of my way to research this stuff. The game doesn't really give you a moment to say, hey, do you want to learn about this stuff? Well, I mean, they do, but not really. Sometimes the game will point to a book that's right near them and say, look up this book to learn more. Instead of just maybe more diegetically just telling us stuff. Like, I don't want them to just spiel out nonsense. I want them to just explain some of the core details and say, like, well, if you want to learn more, read this book. Because there's a difference between if you want to know about this thing, read the book. If you want to learn more about the thing, read the book. Which, that difference makes all the difference. Because now, the opus is on you to learn more, not anyone else. And the only reason why I'm going on about this is for that the longest time, I thought Mehru's Dagon was like the head honcho of the Daedra until Martin mentions, or Sean Bean, mentioned the other Daedric princes. To elaborate on what the Daedra are, to simplify, there are the Daedra and there are the Aedra. Okay, long time ago, someone called, I can't remember, it doesn't really matter, tried to make up Tamriel. The Aedra were like, yeah, we're totally in on this, we'll help you. The Daedra are like, we're cool, and thus the divide happened, and it depends on lore and a bunch of other stuff. That is the simplified version, okay? And like, sure, I get it, you don't need to know that part in particular, but I feel as though without that context, the difference between a Daedra and the Aedra, or the Divines if you want to be more particular, really don't matter to me all that much, when it doesn't feel like there's any need to make that difference. I apologize for going a little off topic, it just felt like I needed to say it here because it was where I was getting a lot of misinterpretations of things, so I just needed to say that and just get it out of my head. Like, for example, the Mana Marco stuff, I didn't know who he was, so when we're just simplifying, it just hurts us more, and it's just give us a good explanation about what things are happening and allow us to learn more on our own. Okay? But in any case, after getting some items, you basically get into Mankar Cameron's world and you kill him. You're probably wondering, hey, why did Mankar Cameron want to do this all to begin with? Like, why does he want Mehru's Dagon to rule? I don't know. Mankar Cameron is like the biggest what the fuck in this plot in the entirety of anything. Like, I legit don't know who the hell he is, I don't know his backstory, I don't know anything about him, other than he's the ruler of the Mythic Dawn. That's it. I don't even know anything about him. It doesn't feel like it matters? Like, at all? This is where I need to talk about the bigger issue with the plot of Oblivion as a whole. Like, I've been mentioning it beforehand, but the problem with Oblivion's plot is that it's too basic, with nothing making it really worthwhile or notable. Like, if you told me, like, this was some side quest, like, I believe you, because it's not written in such a way where it feels important, you know? Like, there are some big moments, in air quotes, but they don't feel that important in the long run. I just don't really care about what's going on. I don't care about the characters, I don't care about the lore, I don't really care about much else in this game. And I'm just waiting for the end to happen because it just feels like it's dragging on and on about something that doesn't want to try to be more interesting. I'm just bored. Whatever. After killing Mankar Cameron and going back into Cyrodiil's temple in order to relight the Dragonfire, Mehru's Dagon comes in and I'm like, I don't care. it doesn't really matter. Like, why is he allowed out now? I don't know. Does it really matter? Not really. That's mostly because Sean Bean decides to sacrifice himself in order to become an avatar for Akatosh to somehow defeat Mehrunes Dagon and force him out of Tamriel, and basically seals off Tamriel forever from invasion from the Daedra. Game over. I want to say this. I thought I would like the game, and I kinda did, at first. But that's just the charm of a new game coming at me, basically experiencing a game for the first time. However, as the game went on, and as I was playing more of it, I realized, oh, I'm not having fun. This is boring. What am I even doing this for? And once that started happening, I just gave up. I don't know, that just fucking sucks. Like, you're told from so many people that this game was really good. They really loved this game. And you're like, this is just bad. Like, I don't like crapping on other people's games and, like, saying, like, ugh, you should not play this. Because that fucking sucks. Some people put a lot of time and effort into this game, and it's like, you just don't want to talk about it. You're just done. And I just don't know what else to say then. Why? I literally don't know what to say then. The gameplay's bad. It literally gets worse the more you play it. The game's graphics have aged poorly, with nothing really making them worthwhile. Not even good looking nowadays, like unlike some other games. The story is just a mess and just uninteresting, even if you just ignored all the lore stuff. And I just felt empty by the end. I didn't feel like I was triumphant, saving the world, tragic, or anything like that. I was just relieved it was done. And I hate that. Next time, we'll do something more interesting.